I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome to the Vietnam Veterans News Podcast. News of interest about Vietnam veterans from a Vietnam veteran. Now, here's your host, Mac Payne.
This is Mac Payne here with episode 1762 of the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast. News about the Vietnam War and the brave veterans who served there, as told to you by yours truly, a Vietnam veteran. Many times people will ask me, Mac, why do you do that Vietnam Veteran News Podcast? It's a lot of work. Do you do it for the money? Are you hired by some big corporation or something? My answer is always the same. The number one reason I do it is to build up the reputation of the Vietnam veteran generation, one that is as great as any that ever heeded the call of duty from its country. Another reason I do it is because I enjoy so much meeting, talking with, and writing about Vietnam veterans. They are a wonderful group of people. I'm not kidding when I say that I believe that they are as great as any group of Americans that ever stepped forward to serve their country. That's why I do it. And by the way, I'm not doing it for the money. I'm not hired by some big corporation. I am just one individual Vietnam veteran here in the Vietnam Veteran News bunker in Lake Placid, Florida, which is 100 miles due south of Orlando, Florida, talking about the Vietnam veterans and the war that we all fought in. Recently, I had the pleasure and honor of having a guest on this podcast who is a member of the Vietnam veteran generation. His name was John Shoemaker, originally from Boston, Massachusetts. John was a platoon leader and company commander in the 2nd Battalion, 1st Infantry, 196th Infantry Brigade, part of the Americal Division. One of the reasons I know John was an outstanding platoon leader and company commander is because of the way he treated his troops. He was very careful about his men, took good care of them, and did the best he could for them, and most of them came through it safely. In this episode, I'm going to share with you a story about an enlisted man who served in 2nd Battalion of the 1st Infantry of the 196th Infantry Brigade. This man's name is Larry Siedenburg. Larry, if I mispronounced your last name, I apologize up front. I always try to get the names right. Larry's from the great heartland of America out there in Missouri and Kansas. Larry was in C Company, 2nd of the 1st Infantry and the 196th Infantry Brigade. John Shoemaker was over in B Company. I am sharing Larry's story with you for several reasons. Number one, to give you the viewpoint of an enlisted man who served in 2nd Battalion, 1st Infantry, 196th Infantry Brigade, and also to point out what an outstanding representative he is of that Vietnam veteran generation. When you listen to Larry's story, you can't help but be proud of all the people who served our nation and be proud of this nation because of people like Larry Siedenburg and John Shoemaker, our citizens of this great country. People like those two guys make it a great country. There's some other things that are in this story about Larry that are going to be extremely eye-opening, and I'm not going to be afraid to point it out, because it has to do with some spiritual aspects of our life. The story I'm going to share with you about Larry Siedenburg is titled, Army Veteran Served as Infantryman with Combat Assault Teams in Vietnam. This story was submitted by Jeremy P. Amick. He writes on behalf of the Silver Star Families of America. Thank goodness, in this case, the person he's writing about, Larry Siedenburg, is still with us, and we're better off for it. This story appeared in the News Tribune, the pride of Jefferson City, Missouri. Without any further ado, let's get into this story. Dateline, Jefferson City, Missouri. An animated bearing, humorous reflections, and wide grin seem to define the demeanor of Larry Siedenburg. His effusive personality, however, belies many of the hardships and losses he experienced as a combat soldier during the Vietnam War, service that earned him promotion to sergeant and the award of not one, but 2 Bronze Stars for valor in addition to an Air Medal. I can say this, as a Vietnam veteran, they used to give away Bronze Stars like they were candy bars over there in Vietnam. But when you got a Bronze Star with a V device on it for valor, that was something to look at. Larry received 2 Bronze Stars with V. That tells you a lot right there about Larry Siedenburg. Continuing, Siedenburg recalls, I grew up in the small community of Lawn Elm and attended a Lutheran school there through the 8th grade. I eventually graduated from Bunchton High School in 1967 and decided to continue my education at Capital Business College in Jefferson City. That's another point in his favor. Larry was a wise young man. Earning his degree in business administration and accounting in the spring of 1970, he was employed as a management trainee with J.C. Penney in Kansas City, Kansas. A few months later, he received his draft notice and was inducted into the U.S. Army in June of 1970. Make a note here. Larry did not run off to Canada when he received his draft notice. He answered the call from Uncle Sam. Larry explained it this way. I entered the Army in Kansas City, and then they put a group of us on a bus and sent us to basic training at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. My training company did quite well, and we actually set records with the number of soldiers that qualified as experts on the rifle range and also in several aspects of our physical training. You know, all those guys out in the Midwest did a lot of shooting growing up. That's probably why his company did so well in rifle range qualifications. Continuing, Siedenburg also noticed that when his basic training was finished, the Army made the decision that he should serve as an infantryman, sending him to Fort Polk, Louisiana, to begin advanced infantry training. Throughout the next several weeks, he and his fellow soldiers trained with rifles, grenades, and mortars, in addition to performing combat patrols while learning map reading, land navigation. I was a squad leader during the training, and it was fun, he said. Overall, everyone there wanted to learn everything possible because we all figured that we were headed to Vietnam as soon as the training was finished. That's some powerful motivation when you know that what you're learning in this school may just keep you alive when you go to Vietnam. I also like the fact that he said it was fun being a squad leader in AIT. That's another point in his favor. The more I read this story, the higher Larry Siedenburg's reputation rises with me. Continuing, his suspicions were proven correct after completing his advanced training in October of 1970, at which time he received orders to report to Fort Ord, California, in preparation for deployment to Vietnam. I can tell you this, when you get the official orders on a piece of paper that you're going to Vietnam, it gives you a real strange feeling up your spine. For the next week or so, he performed guard duty and other seemingly mundane tasks while waiting to board the commercial aircraft for his overseas flight. Upon arrival in Vietnam in November of 1970, that's just a few months after I arrived in June of 1970, up at Camp Eagle with the 101st Airborne Division. Enough about me. Let's continue with Larry's story. Larry was assigned to Company C, 2nd Battalion, 1st Infantry, under the 196th Infantry Brigade, operating out of a U.S. Army base at Chulai. Shortly after his arrival, Siedenburg explained he transferred to a nearby site named Hawk Hill, just above LZ Baldy, where I spent some time. Note, Larry was in C Company, 2nd of the 1st Infantry. John Shoemaker was in B Company, 2nd Battalion, 1st Infantry. They might have even crossed paths at one time or another. Continuing, Hawk Hill was a fire base, and we made our patrols from that location, Larry said. We were a swing battalion, so whenever there was a hot spot with regard to enemy activity, that's where they sent us. Well, at least on the bright side, you didn't sit around being bored all the time. The veteran explained he participated in a number of combat assaults and was often inserted into those hot spots by helicopters. When the helicopters flew in to deliver us to an assault area, we had 3 seconds to get off the aircraft, or else you were taking a big jump because they had to get out of there quickly or risk being shot down, Larry said. There were many missions, he affirmed, where it appeared they were needlessly expending time and lives of soldiers when taking certain objectives. This is key here. Many times I've said in this podcast that the way the Vietnam War was fought seemed to be all screwed up. We would go in and fight the NVA and maybe take a position like Hamburger Hill or even Khe Sanh or Ai Drang Valley. Fight, lose lives, run out the bad guys, and then we would leave, and then the bad guys would come back. Many times we would go back to take the same area. Larry's going to tell you how this situation appeared to him from an infantryman's perspective. Larry said this about the situation. On occasion, we were sent in to take a certain area by pushing out the enemy in that area. Then we would pull back and the enemy would come back in and take the area over again, which was followed by us going back in and pushing them back out. From an infantryman's perspective, that would appear to be kind of stupid, especially because every time you would go in there, we would probably lose some of our guys. On another mission, Larry recalls being a member of a team of approximately 24 infantrymen sent into an area swarming with enemy forces in an effort to retrieve a pilot and an intelligence officer whose helicopter had been shot down. We located the helicopter, but the 2 guys were not there, Larry said. After the mission, I learned from a friend that we weren't expected to make it back because they had already prepared letters to send home to our parents informing them of our deaths, but we surprised them. I bet he got a big kick out of that. Said, "Hey guys, we're still here. Get rid of those letters." He didn't say if they ever located the pilot and the intelligence officer. I hate to say it, but those 2 guys were probably in bad shape, especially if they were captured by the NVA or VC. Normally, because the enemy did not have a whole lot of facilities like vehicles and buildings and things, unless a captured American had some high value to them, normally it was all over for them. That's probably what happened to this pilot and officer that went down with him. Continuing with Larry's story. Several months into his assignment, Siedenburg began to suffer from multiple and persistent boils that developed from infected mosquito bites. This medical complication resulted in his reassignment to the brigade's ammunition depot, eventually becoming the non-commissioned officer in charge. This tells you a lot about Larry Siedenburg. In those situations, the cream quickly rises to the top. Early on in a situation like that, it becomes very obvious who's got what it takes to move up in rank. Obviously, Larry had it. Larry said this, "While I was in Vietnam, I extended to stay in country 1 month and 7 days because that would give me less than 180 days left on my commitment when I returned to the States. If you had less than 180 days when you got back to the U.S., they gave you an early discharge." There's another point in Larry's favor. He was smart enough to extend in Vietnam 1 month and 7 days. When he returned home, he was discharged. Leaving the U.S. Army in December of 1971, he established his own construction company, which he operated for several years. In 1981, he married Helen, and the couple raised 4 daughters. In later years, he was hired by the Missouri Department of Conservation and retired with 31 years of service. I can tell you this right now. Larry was an outstanding employee of the Missouri Department of Conservation. He stayed there for 31 years. I'm sure he did a great job and left the place better than he found it. In recent years, Siedenburg has remained committed to his faith and has served in many capacities with the Emmanuel Lutheran Church at Honey Creek. He acknowledges, although many of his fellow veterans who returned from the war experienced issues related to post-traumatic stress disorder, he believes his faith has granted him peace in spite of the trauma he witnessed. I lost a close friend, Keith Haney, over in Vietnam, he bluntly remarked. There were a lot of good guys killed over there, and you didn't try to make any new friends because you didn't know how long those people would be around. I know that being a God-fearing person, knowing that he protected me during so many dangerous situations, factored into me coming home without too many problems. It was through God's will that I made it back safely. There is the top check mark about Larry Siedenburg that makes him an outstanding individual, an outstanding Vietnam veteran, and an outstanding American. He makes a key point about his belief in God helped him through the many difficult situations. I always say that the Bible is the greatest success manual ever written. It is a handbook that will get you through most anything. Most people consider the Bible to be a spiritual document, which it is. The greatest spiritual document ever written. If someone will take that book and read it and take from it all the spiritual benefits of it, there's also a ton of good advice for getting through every day on this fallen world that we live in, because it is not a question of if bad things are going to happen to us. The question is when. Bad things are going to happen to us all. Good people, bad people, and everybody. If someone is just wise enough to accept the gift that Jesus Christ offers you on a silver platter at no cost, you'll be a whole lot better off. The good thing about it is this. Once somebody accepts Christ and realizes the enormity of such a gift, it helps you get through bad situations like Vietnam, because you realize that no matter what happens to you, even if you get thrown into a rock crusher and your body is torn apart and ripped up into little pieces, as you're going down into that rock crusher, feet first it starts tearing up your feet, and then your legs, and moves on up to your waist, and then your chest. As you're going through that terrible experience, you are confident when it's all over with, everything's going to be wonderful. If you have that type of an attitude, it'll help you get through a lot of difficult times. And again, on this earth, bad things will happen to good people, same way as they happen to bad people. If you've accepted that gift of salvation that comes to you free of charge on that silver platter, you're going to be just fine. Larry Siedenburg typifies that reality. He also typifies the fact that the Vietnam veteran generation is as great as any that ever heeded the call of duty from its country. Larry Siedenburg, I thank you so much for your service to your country, not only in Vietnam, but in the 50-plus years since you returned from Vietnam. I am hereby issuing you unofficial Vietnam Veteran News Podcast salute for your service to your country. We thank you so much, and we wish you and your family the best. This is Mac Payne closing out episode 1762 of the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast. Thank you so much for coming to listen to these stories. You are cordially invited to return again soon and often to listen to more that will be coming your way on this podcast. The Vietnam Veteran News.
If you like what you hear, then go tell somebody. If you like what you hear, then go tell somebody. Oh, Lord, go tell somebody. Yeah, go tell someone.
How about that? Ain't that a mess?